It's a pleasure to be here and chair this public event. It's great to see from the Slido the enormous range of countries, both within and outside Europe, from which you're attending and listening. And I think that stresses really the importance of clinical trials to public health and to research, but also the importance of the pending step of coming into application of the clinical trial regulation and the availability of the clinical trial information system, which we look forward to really being a further springboard to the improvement of research across Europe. So I'm very happy to have a very strong panel to speak to you on different aspects of the process, and coming from the regulatory framework from the European Commission, EMA, but also from a cross-section of sponsor organizations and experience and national competent authorities. So I'll introduce each speaker in advance of their session. It's also with the agenda, we have speakers from the Commission, from EMA, presenting the regulation and the CTIS system, but also then from the Danish Medicines Agency to give the perspective of national competent authorities, and from academia and industry research from ECRA, UCOPE, and EFPIA. And then we'll come back to EMA to discuss training, but then have a panel discussion. And we hope there to be able to discuss and answer some of the more popular questions of most interest. So please use the Slido to make the best of that opportunity. We will have half an hour for that at the end of the meeting. We'll have a coffee break at 3 o'clock for 15 minutes. So I think it's probably best to stay logged on, but we will be silent, but start promptly again at 3:15. So please be back at your screens for that. So I think really it's best now if I hand on to the speakers. They're well qualified and have the presentations for you. It's a pleasure to introduce Sylvain Giraud. He's head of unit at DG Santé for medical products, quality, safety and innovation in the Directorate General for Health and Food Safety. And they're in charge of EU-level policy developments on quality, availability and affordability of medicines and important aspects of EU legislation, including implementation of the pharma strategy and coordination of international cooperation. Sylvain previously has had a range of roles in DG Santé over the last 10 years, dealing with health systems, global health, and EU health policy coordination. So I think is very well placed to set the scene and the background for the clinical trials regulation. Sylvain, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fergus. Can you hear me well?
I can.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. As you said, we are with my team, and I have my colleagues Edith Chepesi and Christophe Panarenz also in the call. Right now, we are in charge of this legislative framework in the European Commission. This public event today comes at a very important moment for the implementation of the clinical trials regulation. On Saturday, this coming Saturday, the Commission notice, a Commission notice will be published, which will set the clock for the implementation. In 6 months from now, 6 months after this Saturday, on the 31st of January 2022, the regulation will become fully applicable. This is an important milestone, and it was quite a difficult process to get to there. But we need to recognize the efforts that have been made in the last 7 years, and that led us to where we are now. This is an important point of no return, and we still need to do a certain number of activities to be sure everything is ready on that date of full applicability. The full implementation of the clinical trials regulation is important in itself, but it is also a very important condition to deliver on the broader policy objectives that the Commission has set in the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe to make medicines accessible, available and affordable for patients and health systems. Therefore, we think the meeting today is very relevant. And we're grateful to to EMA for organizing it. What is expected from me as we're starting is indeed to set the scene for the more specific and detailed discussions that will follow today. And I propose to do that by going through 4 or 5 questions: why, when, what, and how about the clinical trials regulation, its purpose, its timeline, the concepts that are there, and how we're going to work on implementing it. Next slide, please. So why did we need to change the legal framework when that was proposed back in 2012? The situation still prevailing in a way under the current legislative framework has been challenging. The numbers, as the numbers on this slide show, setting up and conducting clinical trials in the EU was difficult, slow, and expensive. The provisions of the directive that is the existing legal framework seem to have indeed hindered the conduct of clinical trials in the EU, and it has been severely criticized by many stakeholders. This is why the Commission came with a proposal to change the legal framework into the new regulation back in 2012. Next slide, please. To address those challenges, the Commission proposed to renew the legal framework with the aim of making Europe more competitive in clinical research by further harmonizing the approval process, better coordinating between member states, supporting the conduct of multi-country trials, minimizing the scope for regulatory autonomy, ensuring the production of better, more reliable, more robust data, and increasing patient safety and transparency. This was about the why. Moving into the when, well, the regulation was adopted after the Commission proposal in 2012. The regulation was adopted by the co-legislators in May 2014. And since then, there's been intensive work ongoing on its implementation and to ensure its full application. That was a particular challenging process because it needed to take, we needed to take all the different steps to put in place the very important tools to be able to have the legislative framework to work properly. The EU portal and the EU database, what is often referred to as CTIS. The functional specifications for this needed to be audited so that we were sure that we could go ahead. This was done and led to a decision by the management board of the EMA in December 2014. And then in 2014, we agreed the specifications for the audit, and then it took a certain number of steps to get to the finalization of the process, and then through the independent audit that took place to verify whether the system was actually going to deliver and reach the full functionality. That was done, and the next step is, as I said, the publication of the full functionality in the official journal this Saturday, 31st of July, and then 6 months later, on the 31st of January 2022, the regulation will become fully applicable. After that date, and for 12 months, which is until the end of January 2023, applicants will continue to be able to submit either following the new rules or still under the pre-existing rules. But after 12 months, after these 12 months, so after the end of January 23, only the CTR rules will be applicable. And in 25, all ongoing trials will have to be conducted solely under the new rules established by the regulation. Others won't be able to continue. Next slide, please. So I will very briefly only go through some of the new concepts that are brought by the new regulation, and this presentation will be made available, and probably some of these elements you're going to come back in the afternoon in the way that the new regulation adapted the definitions streamline the submissions for the new system, established a single decision per member state, integrating the views of both national competent authorities, but also ethics committees. It's reinforced the coordination by establishing one reporting member state and the involvement of other member states concerned in a coordinated way. Next slide, please. The proposal also, or the regulation also introduces strengthened patient protection mechanisms and independence, reinforces the coordination of safety assessment between member states, and so on. Let me moving to the next slide, which is how. Let me say that quite a lot of documentation and information has been made available to ensure the timely and appropriate implementation. So together with the EMA and national authorities, documents have been prepared and are made available on the Commission website in relation to this regulation. Still, next slide, please. Looking at the how, an important new element with the regulation is that we have now established much more firmly national contact points in each of the member states as the single entry points for applicants, participants, and authorities, and anyone interested to actually facilitate procedures in initial applications, but also for applications for changes and to ongoing trials. So this is these national contact points will be also working together in ensuring full implementation and promoting exchanges between national authorities. So the group called CTIS-July will continue to exist and will continue to work with the same mandate. But a new group, next slide, please. A new group composed of these national contact points I just mentioned will be put in place, and it will have a very important role to play to ensure the exchange discussions on the implementation of this regulation and all matters relating to safety cooperation in particular. Next slide, please. Yeah, I did mention that. So next slide, please. So beyond the expert groups, we have been involved in further collaboration to prepare the application. On this slide, there are a few examples of the different aspects of that this preparation took, and some of them we're obviously going to come back to later this afternoon. Let me add one element that's not there mentioned on the slides, that the Commission will be providing financial support to national authorities to help them through from the EU for Health program, which is a financial program at EU level, to help national authorities to ensure the full application, in particular on developing their cooperation on safety assessment. The Commission is also working on the interface between this regulation and this regulatory framework and other processes, such as, for example, discussions around the in vitro diagnostic regulation, the EU Council Plan, or other EU-level policy process and developments. Next slide, please. Well, this slide is to thank you for your attention and also to wish you a very productive and informative meeting. I am unfortunately not able to stay any longer with you this afternoon. I hope that this scene setter was useful for the conversation that will come, and much more information is going to be provided through the other presentations that will follow today, and you will have plenty of opportunities to ask questions. If after this discussion today, you still have questions in relation to the regulatory aspects of the regulation that you would like to address to the European Commission, please, you may want to do so by using the email address that is here on the screen at the bottom of that slide. That's where I stop. Fergus, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. Very clear objectives and timelines and really stimulating everybody to really get ready now and work in each in our organizations to make sure we're prepared to benefit from the advantages that the new regulation will bring. It's a great pleasure for me now to introduce Peter van Keerbergen, who's head of the clinical trials service at EMA. Peter has PhD in pharmaceutical sciences and masters in informatics, and has worked both in R&D in clinical trials, but also in the Belgian National Competent Authority, where he's had roles in program management in the information systems, but also leading clinical trials, and where he was, from the also Belgian perspective, a lead in the developing world of the regulation and clinical trial information system. And we were very pleased that he was able to join the European Medicines Agency in August 2020, where he brings those experiences and is head of the clinical trial workstream and CTIS program manager. Peter.
Thank you, Fergus, for a nice introduction. Thank you, Sylvain, for opening. I give you a short overview of what CTIS does for the regulation. CTIS is the business tool for the regulation. It's about harmonization, the submissions, the authorization process, and the supervision of clinical trials. Can I ask to go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So what is CTIS, the Clinical Trials Information System? It will be the single entry point for clinical trial submission, authorization, and supervision in the EU and the economic area. By this, we have default, by definition, harmonization of the submission dossier. Currently, sponsors submit clinical trial applications to NCAs, National Competent Authorities, and ethics committees in each country. And with CTIS, sponsors can apply for a clinical trial application in multiple countries with a single application. So it's a big step forward. Serving health in Europe. Can I ask for the next slide, please? Thank you. So what is CTIS technically? We have two dedicated and secure workspaces, and also a public portal. What are the workspaces? We have one for sponsors, we have one for authorities, and you have them at the lower part of the screen. These are secure, and we have a public website, as transparency is also an aim of the regulation, as Sylvain explained. And we have above it, we have the actors, the people who can access it, sponsors, marketing authorization applicants, member states with the ethics committees, the European Commission, and EMA. And for the public website, we have the general public. Can I ask you for the next slide, please? Thank you. Why CTIS? It harmonizes, as I said, the submission, assessment, and supervision of clinical trials. Like this, it serves public health. It facilitates larger scale trials to address key health issues like COVID and cancer. It enables research and innovation in the Union. It enables knowledge sharing between experts, because agencies are now working together for the authorization of the same clinical trial. And we have assurances for investment in clinical research. The economical value of clinical research in the Union is each year between 20 and 30 billion euros. And so, like this, CTR and CTS assure the economical investment, and even more important, the health investment of this. Can I ask you for the next slide, please? Okay, the benefits, very important. What CTS can be used for, it's to apply for clinical trial in up to 30 EU or economical area countries with a single application. It facilitates involvement of trial participants by allowing an easy expansion of trials to other member states. This is the famous Article 14 for this. So if we have a trial that is slowly recruiting in the present member states, one can easily add another member state to allow more fluent recruitment. And we have collaboration across borders for better results and knowledge sharing. We have also a big aim is to ensure that the Union remains an attractive location for clinical research investments. Europe has a very good academic network and it has to be fostered. At the same time, CTIS fulfills all clinical trial publication requirements without additional effort. So from the authorization process towards the publication process, CTS makes it fully automatically. And for the as such, we comply with the requirement of the regulation. Can I ask for the next slide? Okay, how to prepare for CTS? It's a famous slide we have. It's a combination of three concepts: people, processes, your processes, and technology. You have to address those three items at the same time. This means training people, getting them through a change management process, adapting your processes. The regulation involves adaptation of your current processes. And it also involves the use of technology, as we show with CTIS. So these three items have to be met almost at the same time. And this will assure you you're well in line for the go live at the end of January 22. Can I ask you for the next slide, please? So now it's time to prepare for CTS go live. So we have the date, as several people already explained, 31st of January 22. It will be live. And we have a transition period. 1 year, sponsors can choose for an initial whether they follow the regulation or they follow the directive. If they follow the regulation, it has to go through CTS. And after the 31st of January 23, all ongoing trials, all for the initials have to be also in regulation. And at 31st January 25, everything must go through CTS. I think I'm at the end. Thank you for your attention. Please be prepared and hopefully for looking forward for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think you very neatly summarized. This is a challenge for us all now to make sure that our people are prepared and our processes adapted to the regulation and to the technology which we're presenting to you today, to the Clinical Trial Information System. So now it's a pleasure to introduce Ana Rodriguez Sanchez Beato. Ana has a PhD in molecular microbiology, but importantly, after an early career working in clinical research in industry, she joined the EMA in September 2003, where she's been working and leading in areas of good clinical practice, and then also taking over the work on CTIS, which she has been closely involved with since its inception in 2014. So Anna, please, the floor is yours, and you can tell us about organizations, adapting your organizations to work with CTIS. Anna.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. And I think in my presentation, I will try to give you an overview on what are the key steps for users within your organization to start using the system. If we move to the next slide, please. So here, first of all, it's important that all users within your sponsor organization are registered for an EMA account, so meaning that they can get the credential to log in CTIS. A second important step is ensure that the sponsor organization has been previously registered in the EMEA organization management system. And this is relevant in order to be able to proceed with the third step that is presented here, that is the registration of the sponsor administrator, that it will be the high-level administrator role that will be able to manage all users within the sponsor organization. If we can move to the next slide, please. For the step 1 and 2, this will not be required, obviously, in the case that users that are going to use CTIS, they have already an EMA account because they are using other EMA systems, so they can use the same credential. And the second one, the second step, the registration in OMS will not be required if you know that you have already registered your organization in our system. Next slide, please. So we will start with the first step and how users can register to get an EMA account. So we will move to the next slide. Again, as a reminder, if your users are already using other EMA applications and have the credentials, they can use those credentials to log in CTIS. Otherwise, what they have to do is to go to the EMA account management system. We have provided the link in this presentation, and from there you will navigate it to the screen that is shown in the right side of this slide, and you can see just below the password that it's stated create an EMA account, so you can click here and navigate to initiate the process. Alternatively, if you move to the next slide, please. Alternatively, you can try to log in the sponsor workspace, in the CTIS sponsor workspace, and also from there you can see below the login button you have in orange register new users, so you can click there and you will navigate to the EM account management system in order to initiate your registration. Next slide, please. When you navigate to the EM account management system, you will be exposed to what we call a self-service registration form. That is, you have a screenshot here where you will have to enter some mandatory fields like first name, last name, email address, and password. And there will be at the bottom right a button that you click and you will initiate your registration. You will be navigate from here to include some security questions, which will be very relevant in order in those cases that you may forget your password or your username and you want to recover those. So once that is done, if we can move to the next page, please. Okay, so when you have completed the self-registration form and the security question, you will be navigated to this self-service registration confirmation form. So, and for that, you will receive by email a one-time token that you will have to populate to confirm your details. And if you move to the next slide, please. So after confirming the one-time token, user will be able to see what are the username that has been automatically generated by the EMA account management portal, along with the personal information, as you have seen in the screen, in the previous screenshot that was placed in the slide. And please ensure that you keep your username and password in a safe place, and in order not to lose it. So otherwise, you have always the option to try to recover that information, and that's why we will have to answer some of the security questions that will be asked to you when you initiate the registration. Also, once this is completed, the confirmation of the registration, you will receive an automatic notification via email just to confirm that the registration has been successfully happened. Next slide, please. So as I said, the second step is to ensure that your sponsor organization has been registered in the EMEA organization management system. Next slide, please. So as mentioned previously, if you know it's already registered, then you can skip obviously this step, but otherwise you can go to the SPOR portal. SPOR means Substance Product Organization and Referential, for those that are not familiarized with this terminology, and you will be navigated to a screen that will look like as is shown in this slide, and here you see the different area, substance product. The third one is the organization one. You will have to click there. Next slide, please. And from there, the first step is you will be, let's say, obliged to search for your organization, because we have to ensure that this has not been previously registered, so it will save time and we will prevent submission of duplicated information. And you have a set of filters that you can complete to run your search, like organization ID, organization name, location, etc. And then you can run your search by clicking in the button at the bottom right of this screenshot. And then next slide. So if your organization is not displayed with you using the search functionality, then it's there when you will be able to request the creation of a new organization from the search page directly, or from the view organization location details page. And bear in mind that if you have to register your organization, you will need to provide some supporting documents that will be required for the EMA data stewards to validate that request. Next slide, please. Additional details on the OMS registration process can be found in the OMS web user manual, and you have here the link. You can see in orange documents, and you have below a display of list of documents. At the bottom is the manual, but I also want to bring to your attention that in the, I think the fourth one or the third one, the second one is a webinar that was conducted recently, and this was video recorded, where is explained also how to register organizations. So I advise, if you want to get more familiarized, also to watch that webinar that was video recorded. Next slide. So, and then the last step is recording or registering your sponsor administrator. That will be the first step to initiate the assignment of roles to users to use the system. So can we move to the next slide? Just to make you aware, in CTIS we have two types of roles. We have the user administrator's roles, and we have then the business roles that are, in fact, will be those roles that will perform the business process in CTIS. Within the administrator roles, we have, in fact, in the sponsor group of user, we have two types. We have the high-level administrator, which is the sponsor administrator, which is the subject of this third step. And then we have the CT admin administrator. But the CT admin administrator, as well as the business roles, will be assigned directly in CTIS, starting after the registration of the sponsor administrator. Next slide, please. So here is just to show how you can register your sponsor administrator roles, which need to be validated by EMEA and will be registered in the EM account management system. Therefore, you will have to log in the EM account management system, user the credential that you have already obtained. When you log in, you will be exposed to the screenshot or the screen that is presented in the right side of this slide. And you can see that in orange, there is a tab that says Manage My Assets. So you will click there. Next slide, please. Here then you will have the option, because obviously in email management system, you can register all administrators for different systems, but the one you are interested is in CTIS. Therefore, in this search functionality, you can enter the keyword CTIS, and then you will be displayed, as you can see below, what are the high-level administrator roles in CTIS, and specifically the one of your concern, which is the CTIS high-level sponsor administrator, which is the last one in the list. And so you can click there, select that one, and click the button next. And please, can we move to the next slide? And then the next step will be to attach the affiliation letter. There will be a template for the affiliation letter that will be made publicly available from 1st of September, when we have planned to open the registration of all sponsor administrators. So at that time, you will have there this template, and you can populate it and attach it as part of this step. Next step, please. Next slide, sorry. And then once you have attached the affiliation letter, you have to complete the form by clicking in complete, and then you will follow by selecting the organization for which you want to register your sponsor administrator. And again here, to do this, there is an interface between the EM account management system and OMS, and this is why the previous step is the registration of the organization in OMS. So you will be able to search, they will have display the organization available, and you select the most appropriate in relation to the sponsor administrator that you want to register. Next step, next slide, sorry. And then when it's done, EMEA will be responsible to validate this request that has gone through the EM account management system. And once this validation has been completed, and then you will be assigned with the role of a sponsor admin. And therefore, from the EM account management system, you will be able to see this tab that is highlighted here in this screenshot, the CTIS role admin. And then from here, now you will be whoever is the first sponsor administrator will be able then to approve additional requests of the same role for that sponsor organization. So then EMA will be involved only in the appointment of the first administrator, and then the first one will be responsible to approve others. And obviously, we recommend to have at least 2 high-level administrators or sponsor administrators to prevent situations when one of those leave the company or is sick or whatever. So you have always a backup that can log in CTIS and assign roles. And I think I finished from my side. No, this is just to show how the first sponsor administrator will be able to visualize other requests. So you have several options. You will have, as you can see in the top right side, there is a warning that there is a message regarding a new request. Here also you have under the tab approvals, you will see that there is a new request, or also there is one tab that is your pending approval, so you can navigate there and you will see the request, and the first sponsor admin can approve for the request. Next slide. So I think I finished from my side, and I hand over to you, Fergus.
So thank you very much, Anna, and it's good news that we hear that people will be able to register their sponsor organizations and people from the September onwards. I think that's very, very good. So now it's a pleasure to introduce Sarah Scales, who's Clinical Trial Change Management Officer at the EMA. Sarah joined us last year and is working based on a broad range of experience in different industries in implementing change management and bringing those skills to us here. So I'm very happy to give the floor to Sarah, who will talk to us about modeling sponsor organizations and the CTIS personas, which she will explain. Sarah, you have the floor.
Great, and thank you very much, Fergus, for handing the floor over to me. Thank you all again for joining today, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to tell you again about the Slido. So we are getting a lot of good interaction on the Slido. We will present again how to join, but just briefly, if you go to slido.com, you can use code 29July. And I would like to please remind people to upvote or give a thumbs up to questions that they would like to see answered, and we will answer the most popular questions. We also have a poll running there about organization type, so please do answer that as well. Okay, but on to the topic of the day. I am here to talk to you about CTIS user personas and sponsor organization modeling. These are two topics that highly relate to what Peter mentioned before about people and processes being very big parts of successful technology adoption. We tend to talk a lot about the technology, of course, but people and processes are a very important part of it as well. So now I'll tell you a bit about the CTIS user personas, which looks at the people who will use the technology, in this case, CTIS. So first of all, what is a persona? Well, a persona is a visual model that is used to represent different stakeholder groups. I will tell you a bit more about what that means in a moment, and you will see an example which will help to make this all clear, I think. But first of all, the user personas look inside the organizations that will use CTIS to see who does what related to clinical trials in that organization. So for example, in a pharmaceutical company, you may have, regulatory project managers, regulatory leads who do certain tasks, in-country specialists who do others, and submission specialists who do other things again. Each of those has a set of tasks when it comes to CTIS, and they have a different set of needs when it comes to training. So it can be really powerful to start looking inside your own organization and seeing who is who that will need to use CTIS and what do they need to be successful with it. We have done this activity in collaboration with sponsor representatives to give a high-level CTIS user persona, and we also encourage sponsors to start looking within their own organizations. What personas do is group users whose basic tasks and needs are similar. So I will show you some personas in a moment, which will likely be similar to people who work in your organization. But of course, because we're doing it at the level of the EU and EEA, it constitutes a best fit, and you might want to tailor them a bit for your own organization. Next slide, please. So we did an exercise of identifying the core user personas of people in sponsor organizations that are likely to interact with CTIS. What we found in large sponsors and CROs is that 3 personas will typically interact with CTIS processes very regularly. One here is called the regulatory project manager, for example, and this person is typically responsible for coordinating the clinical trial application package, getting input from other people in their organization or organizations they work with, and coordinating responses to RFIs. They may or may not log in and input that information into CTIS. In some organizations, we see that they rely on the CTIS submission manager, who works in a slightly more administrative role to actually input the data into CTIS. So there can be different ways that this works in different companies. And typically, there's also in-country specialists who provide the data for Part 2 for submission to CTIS, but again, may not log in themselves to CTIS. Then if we go to the SME and Academia personas on the next slide. Here we see that in the SME and Academia context, there can be quite different people working on clinical trials. So we have the study coordinator who in smaller organizations may technically run the clinical trial day to day, but also coordinate the clinical trial package. In slightly larger organizations, we see clinical trial submission specialists who actually work on regulatory submissions all day for a larger number of trials. And in quite small academic organizations, we see study nurses who may be the ones that actually go in and log in and input information into CTIS in very small studies. There can also be the safety specialist as well. So this is just an example of the user personas that we have identified with input from sponsor organizations that can typically interact with CTIS. I always encourage you to think, now that you see what a persona is, who is it in my organization that will interact with CTIS? What are their responsibilities when it comes to clinical trials? And then the next stage is, what will they do in CTIS and what kind of user roles will they have? And we are trying to help with that with the user persona templates. So if we go to the next slide, you will see here this is an example of a user persona template. This is for the regulatory project manager, which is a persona I showed on the previous slides. Here it gives in the speech bubble a little bit about what this person's responsibilities are in their own organization. So they coordinate the clinical trial package. It also then shows what this person typically does in CTIS related to their responsibilities. So in the CTIS application usage part, you will see that in some organizations, this person goes into CTIS, inputs data, submits the application, and monitors notices and alerts. In other organizations, they may keep more of an overview of those tasks, while another person, like the submissions manager or a regulatory project manager in the CRO, goes into CTIS and inputs the data. And on the left-hand side, you see that we have a guide to the user roles this person could have in order to complete their tasks in CTIS. This will always just be a guide or a starting point for you to think about what user roles you could give your regulatory project managers. But I think it's a good way to begin diving into this and see how tasks in CTIS can relate to user roles. Next slide, please. So we have developed these user personas. The next step is for the user personas to be published on the EMA CTIS training page shortly. And we will update people within the CTIS newsletter when that has been done. But even without the templates there, now that you know a bit about what a persona is and when the templates come as well, we would encourage sponsors to think about how you can use them. So will you use these templates to help map user roles to end users in your organization? You can also use them to create training plans. So when you think about what each kind of persona does within CTIS, you can create training for them around that. And you can also use them as characters to help storytelling in your trainings in order to, bring it to life a bit more. It helps to cement what people will do in reality in CTIS. And next slide, please. Then just I wanted to tell you briefly about the sponsor organization modeling piece. This looks more about the processes side of the people, processes, and technology triangle, and is trying to answer some questions from sponsors around how to best organize processes and structures for CTIS. So what is organization modeling then? It is trying to assist sponsors in these organization and process preparations for CTIS. So we hear questions coming up about, certain sponsors may run clinical trials where they work with multiple CROs. Maybe they also work with academic sponsors. Maybe they even work with other commercial sponsors within joint clinical trials. And the question is how to best organize for CTIS. Who accesses CTIS? What actual people access it? So again, back to the user personas of regulatory project manager, for example. And what will their user roles be in CTIS? So this is a big area related to sponsor organizations. And the aim of this is to work in collaboration with some sponsor representatives to identify some principles and good practices for sponsor organization models. Again, it's the case where things can be different in each organization, and what we can give is some principles and good practices as guidance, as a tool to help while sponsors are considering their own internal processes and organization structures. Next slide, please. So the status of this activity, sponsor representatives have been identified for collaboration. The current activity is to determine, as mentioned, in different trial setups, which actors would work inside and outside of CTIS. And after that, the activity will be to link the user personas to this and also the user roles of actors so that we can publish this principles and good practices document. So I would encourage you to subscribe to the CTIS newsletter to gain updates on this activity. You can do that by emailing ct.communication@ema.europa.eu. And you just simply have to say, subscribe me to the newsletter. You will then get an email every time we publish, and we will be progressively giving updates on these two activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And all of these are important in really preparing your people and your organization for the implementation of CTIS and designing your organization, designing your user profiles and how you build your teams so that they best fit your own organization and enable you to use the best advantage of the new regulation and CTIS. I'm happy now to introduce Marielle Gard Sorensen. Marielle Gard is a special advisor and project manager at the Danish Medicines Agency, has a master's in pharmacy, but since 2016 in particular, building on her work as a clinical trial assessor, she's been closely involved as a member state product owner in CTIS development, is really familiar with the system, but is also an excellent participator in our master training programs and in developing solutions for clinical trials, both at national and European level. So Maria, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fergus, and thank you for letting me be here, inviting me to give this introduction. I think it's a very important meeting and a very important milestone now that we are closing in on the actual date when the regulation becomes applicable. So thank you very much. I will give you some highlight of some of the ways that member states offer their support for the preparedness and especially the implementation of the clinical trial regulation. So if you go to the next slide, and with the very fine introduction made by Fergus, I think in the interest of time, we can skip this rather thorough introduction. So member state support actually comes in many shapes and colors, as I've tried to visualize on this one. We have the regular information in writing in terms of guidance and Q&As, and especially as also mentioned by Sylvain, the documents that are available already at the Commission website. A huge contribution has been made from several member states also in developing that sort of documentation, and I will pick some of them also in a bit. In the same time, we are always offering more on-demand assistance and advice when needed from the sponsors, and are also heavily engaged, perhaps a little bit behind the scenes, working in establishing best practices to ensure that we have harmonized procedures and facilitating smooth processes when we are aligning and harmonizing and trying to ensure that that everything is running smoothly when we go live with this new way of working under the regulation. In addition to that, many local activities in each member state is also going on, and they may vary, of course, but I will pick up on some of them and tell you a little bit generic about it, and also tell you a little bit about some of the examples we are doing and the initiatives we are running in Denmark. If you go to the next slide. As already mentioned, we have on the Commission website already published the very extensive Q&A document on the clinical trials regulation. And it is currently in a draft status, and new updates are continuously being made. But I will really recommend you to go in and look at these. Many of the responses that you're searching for will be found in that Q&A document. And especially if you are planning and are running low interventional clinical trials, I also wish to emphasize to have a look at the risk proportionate approaches in clinical trials guideline that is also published on the Commission website. When it comes to the best practices, these are very much being developed under the Clinical Trial Facilitation and Coordination Group, the CTIS-July, under the HMA. And they are really promoting harmonization of the clinical trial assessments, of the decisions, and along the procedures across especially the national competent authorities. And of course, you could say that the best way that the member states can ensure preparedness and support the sponsors is by being prepared themselves and having clear procedures running smoothly when we go live, and also, of course, having clear guidance. So a lot of, you could call them internal best practices are being developed, such as how to select RMS and how to collaborate about the safety assessments and things like that. But directly aimed at the sponsors, we already have published a guideline on the transition of clinical trials under the directive to the regulation. So a lot of help can also be found there. We already also on the CTIS-July website have a long list of guidelines that are also being updated accordingly to make sure, for instance, the guidance on complex clinical trials will be adapted to ensure that the purpose is also fit under the regulation. So if you go to the next slide, please. An initiative when it comes to a more direct on-call assistance or advice, you could say, an initiative is being developed now to streamline questions so that we have a single entry point when it comes to questions related to the CTIS and the CTR, and ensuring that member states and EMA and the Commission are collaborating in responding and ensuring that the harmonization is really done, and also when we are responding to questions. In addition to that, I'm pretty sure that I can only talk for our own agency, of course, but most member states are very nice to also respond to questions when you simply pick up the phone. Just a small recommendation from my side there. In addition to that, I just also wish to emphasize that even though we have the sponsor master trainers and the member state master trainers, many member state master trainers, actually I've written here that they have sponsor knowledge, but that actually means that they have knowledge about the functionalities in the sponsor workspace. So if really needed and something raises some difficulties, they are also better equipped and capable of offering you some service and advice when it comes to that. And the same goes for the sponsor training. We have member state representatives also supporting that, so they have a good knowledge of what will be an issue and how to tackle if something is bugging a little bit, you could say. Examples of the local activities that are initiated around the member states. Many are working on their organizational structure set up, especially when we're talking about the ethics committees and where they need to collaborate in the assessment of the part one. Professionalization, you could say, is taking place, where you are really ensuring that timely assessments in the coordinated assessment can take place. Pilots are being initiated both under the VHP but also nationally, where the exercises are being done, you could say, in collaborating in the assessments of the part one of the dossier, so to speak. Also, many member states are preparing to have a system-to-system integration with the CTIS, also to ensure clear oversight of assessments and everything that is going on in the system, so that we can respond and collaborate with the other authorities and the sponsors in a timely manner. If you go to the next one, I can give you a few examples on what we're doing in Denmark currently. Some of the things we're working on is that it has already been set up that the medicines research ethics committees, that's a new name, they have a brand new structure and a new organization to ensure that they are ready for the regulation, both for the clinical trial regulation, but also for the device regulation. And we are continuously collaborating a lot to be very clear on our local procedures, exactly for the collaboration in the assessments of the part 1, so that we can ensure that we have timely assessments and clear procedures. We are working with establishing a system integration to the CTIs from both authorities, both the Ethics Committee and the Danish Medicines Agency, for the same purpose. Exactly the oversight and timely assessment and streamlined procedures. We have a continuous communication with our local stakeholders. We have frequently updates of our website with news and Q&As as they tick in. We try to be as clearly communicating as we can, and also referring very much to the very extensive information provided by especially the EMA and the Commission. And we are actively promoting all the training and info events to our local stakeholders and collaborating. I also wish to emphasize with our public GCP units and trying to ensure that they are also well prepared to support our academia sponsors, which we have quite a lot of in Denmark. Finally, but not least, of course, I wish to emphasize what we are planning in the autumn to have an event and information. We don't have a final date yet, but we're planning to have an info event locally here at the agency in collaboration with our ethics committee. And I think that would be all for now, except I just want to emphasize my key message here that you should really, at this time point, simply keep in touch and tuned in on the various websites. A lot of information can be found here, especially on the Commission. UDRELEX 10 website, where you have the Q&A and a lot of guidelines, and the EMA training and newsletter, especially the newsletter will give you advice on when to check in on special events. The CTIS-July website as well, and then of course the local authorities websites as well will give you a lot of information when needed. So that would be my key message for now, and thank you once again for the attention.
Thank you very much, Maria, and excellent presentation and emphasis on the need really for communication and interaction, and for everybody to stay in contact with their national authorities and watch and prepare for new information and familiarize yourself with it. So thank you very much. We'll have a short break now for comfort, 10 minutes, and we'll start at 1:15 promptly. So you can stay logged on, and we'll be back with you in 10 minutes. Thank you. Hello again, everybody, and welcome back. It's good to now move on to hear from the sponsors. Obviously, really important in this whole clinical trial process, since no clinical trial will start without a sponsor having developed a protocol and of course initiating the clinical trial applications through the CTIS system. We have 3 speakers now representing the academic perspective, small and medium enterprise, and larger industry developers. So 3 different but complementary perspectives, and I'm very glad to introduce this first speaker, Andrea Seidel-Gletzer. Andrea has been working for the last 10 years with the University Hospital of Heidelberg, KKS, where she works really providing support and CRO-like process, if I understand, mainly for investigator-initiated trials, but also some smaller enterprises. Prior to that, she had experience in industry, and since March 2020, Andrea has been working closely with us also as a representative of the academia perspective in CTIS testing. So, Andrea, the floor is yours. Very welcome.
Yes, thank you, Fergus, and I hope you all can hear me well.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, okay, that's nice. Okay, good afternoon, colleagues, from my side also. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to present a little bit how academia is preparing for CTIS and to speak to all of you. Maybe we can skip the next slide, yeah, because it's the introduction. Fergus already did, thanks. Yeah, First of that, let me just mention why academia might be special for this and why this might be a real huge challenge for academia to implement the regulation and also the use of CTIS. As you know, academia is always limited in resourcing, especially with personal resources like staff, as well as financial resources. The other point is we also have very various organizational structures throughout Europe and even throughout each country. So the experience and professionalization level is very, very various and very different. So this might be a hurdle, as you already saw on the user personas. We have a little bit different structures. So there might be very huge research organization and networks like EORTC, but also there are only small study groups and only investigators who do trials with public funding. So next slide, please. So yeah, the academia perspective on preparing for CTIS, where are we? To be honest, we are at the very beginning or at this time. So a lot of colleagues are still struggling with implementing the new medical device regulation, who also came up this year. And at the actual time point, a lot of organizations are taking the decision on the approach they want to follow. As you know, we have the organization-centric or the trial-centric approach. And I must say, it is very nice that I hear a lot of feedback from organizations that they want to follow the organization-centric approach on the sake of a really good sponsor oversight that is provided through this approach. And yeah, this is what at least what I had as a feedback, that a lot of organizations want to follow this. Yeah, what needs to be done in the organizations if the decision is taken? They are rolling out the decision to the trial teams in the various settings, and at least here in Heidelberg, to the hospital, the departments. And we also have a lot of organizations who try to find a sponsor admin team, which is needed, so that the roles can be managed on an organizational level. This is taking place right now, and a lot of trial teams have to be informed and have to be appointed who will be responsible in the departments, and that's what's going on at the moment. Next slide, please. Well, during the registration and preparation, we are already facing some challenges that some might be expected, some might not really be expected and come up surprisingly for us. One of the points is that we already have a lot of sponsors organizations already registered under different names. And before we even can start, we have to do a cleanup first, so that we have one organization, one ID that should be used by each department and investigator that does clinical trials under the sponsorship. So, and this raises further concerns, further questions like will they charge us for this? What are the costs of registration? How can we clean up? How will this process be done? And yeah, that's a lot of work to do. Also, the possibility to bypass the registration of an organization is a big question to us, because there are a lot of different names for some organizations. So this is challenging, and also working at a European level is challenging for academia, because for now we mostly worked on a national level. So we have a lot of new systems, a lot of new wordings, a lot of new groups, like Maria already mentioned, CTFG and CTEG, and we have to get used to a lot of new systems, new wordings, and yeah, new work levels. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I told you, we are not that far from academia side, but what will come next after we cleared all the things for registration? There are also a lot of things, I think in the Q&As, I already saw a lot of questions about serious breaches. There are a lot of new workflows for the management of a trial life cycle that will come up to us. And we have to try to do this from the scratch, as we a lot of times have nothing to rely on. So these are all new processes. That is what is happening now in the departments, and yeah, also the role management and access to CTIS. Who will do what? That's what Sarah said before. This is something that is also something you have to identify who is doing which work and who is working really in CTIS. What is also important is to keep an eye on the transition period, because the transition period, especially if you receive public funding and have to move the trial from one regulation to the other or whatever, we have not exactly identified the workload of this transition, and this might be also, you have to calculate and you have to include this in the public funding, but you don't really know what will be needed. So this is something that should be kept in mind, and this is a little bit unpredictable for us, what will be needed and what time frame and what time will this cost, as we have fundings for most of the time 3 years only. So those are the difficulties. Yes, timelines, you all know timelines are tight for everyone in the new CDR, but we often have small budgets, we have public funding, and we have no possibilities to control partners and sites and their delivery to us. So that is another challenge that will come up, and we have to think of processes to align with them and to contract some things that we get feedback in a timely manner. The other thing, and last but not least, it will be really necessary to monitor CTIS on a very regular base, which means on a daily base, to be able to keep track of all the trials we have in the system. And this might be also very challenging. We need additional personal resources to come up with this, and this keeps us or takes us to a lot of uncertainty how to manage all this. Next slide. But to come up with a conclusion, academia is really looking forward to the new regulation. Also, we see some uncertainties, and we have a lot of questions, as you already might have seen at the EMA, but I think we are looking forward to streamlined processes, to good workflows, and to clear working with especially ethics committees and what we have to do. So we are hoping for a good oversight for academic sponsors, which we haven't had so far. And but we all know that additional resources will be needed, and we have to keep looking how we can do this and handle this. And as said before, regarding the transition period, to avoid additional burden, a lot of academic sponsors that gave a feedback to me will be early adopters. So when the regulation comes into force and CTIS into place, we will probably have a lot of academic sponsors that will have waited for that time point to really start from the beginning in CTIS. So we hope that we are ready to this date. And I can only mention that EMA is providing very, very helpful training material, very good training modules with frequently asked answers and questions, and like this today, good webinars and trainings which we all should take place in. Last but not least, I would say it would really be helpful if we could have a sandbox environment in place so that we could train our staff and that we could get used to the system. As you have said it before, we have the master trainers who are mostly for industry, but academia, as I said before, will be early adopters, and so we hope for a sandbox that will help us to train. And that's it from my side. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I will hand back to Fergus for the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Andre, and good to hear that academia is looking forward to the new system and the new regulation, and notwithstanding the challenges, and hopefully we and member states can help you take the steps through that process. I'm now happy to introduce Trine Birgit Molvad, who is VP Regulatory Pharmacovigilance and Medical Writing at Zealand Pharma in Denmark. Trine has a lot of experience in drug and device development and leadership roles in small and larger pharma companies specializing in reg affairs and patient safety. And she's going to speak to us now on behalf of UCOPE and giving a perspective from the small and medium enterprises, which is the kind of a next step also from those of academia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fergus. It's for sure that you know, when we talk about how we can prepare for CTIS, there are a lot of commonalities between us as sponsors in the challenges we're facing, the decisions we have to make. I will be representing UCOPE and giving you the small and medium-sized enterprise perspective, as you said. And I do think we have a lot of the same preparatory challenges, also as big pharma that you will hear from with Rosemary Swallow from FPIA. But on top of those, we also have some additional challenges, and I will try to focus on them in this brief presentation. So thank you. Yeah, just briefly, how are SMEs different here? And I think in the context of the clinical trial information system, the big difference is that we rely heavily on the continuous collaboration and alignment with our CROs. And I'm saying CROs because it's not only one CRO that we deal with most often, depending on the size of the small or medium-sized company. But we often deal with a number of CROs depending on the type of clinical trials we're embarking on. And then further, it will often be the same one and only person who will fulfill several roles within the system. So one person fulfilling several user personas. Last but not least, we often face tight budgets that limit our bandwidth for extracurricular training activities, such as setting aside time to prepare for implementation of new regulatory processes. So as opposed to our drug development efforts, here we often choose to be fast followers, allowing others with more capacity to be first movers. Next slide, please. Today, I'd like to touch upon 3 items that are key for our CTIS preparation. EMA's training efforts, it's been mentioned a few times, and I will definitely also applaud EMA for the amount of training initiatives they're putting forward, including this event. Our in-house versus our CRO and other vendor roles and responsibilities, a specific thing to a lot of SMEs and something I'll be talking more about. And then last but not least, our own training, our own practicing in the system. Where are we and where do we need to get to? And then you'll get a few take-home messages from UCOPE. During the development of this, thank you. So during the development of this presentation, a lot of unanswered questions and uncertainties came up from our members. And these were also shared together with this presentation, more or less the same, by my colleague from UCOPE, Susie Henderson, at the CTIS stakeholder meeting last Friday, in case you think that this slide presentation is familiar. Next slide, please. So EMA training efforts. A variety of very helpful information to get us started is already available. EMA has launched a lot of training in various shapes and forms, and some are listed in this slide. Our preparation is about taking the material now and figure out how to internalize both, and this was said before, the CTIS technology and the user requirements with our existing business processes, pinpoint what needs to change to match the new needs, and then develop a plan for how to do that. Next slide, please. I've said it before, but this is really the key of this presentation. So if you remember nothing but this, that will be fine. We are very dependent on CRO capabilities and the CRO processes, and we need to engage now with our key CROs for co-preparation. This slide illustrates some of the decisions that have also been mentioned before that we need to make with regards to who should do what in CTIS. User administration will be a huge task for small organization. Now, where should we anchor that process? We've talked about the different user management approaches, which to choose. I think I'm with Andrea. It's probably going to be the organization centric for most of us. But again, it is a decision that has to be made for each SME. Then there's a big thing about responsibility split between the sponsor and the CRO on each single role in the system. And that actually has to be determined the way we see it for each trial and will depend on what capabilities that particular CRO has. We have to manage transparency and translation requirements in collaboration with our CROs. Who should do what? There will also be additional tasks that have to be front-loaded and executed in parallel, e.g. the transparency requirements with need for redactions. Probably, again, this has to happen together with our CROs. And each CRO is likely developing their own processes at the same time. So probably one size will not fit all. Next slide, please. Everything we do right now in preparing for the CTIS has impact. We have to balance in and external workload and costs, and the subsequent need for vendor oversight when we outsource. The more we outsource, as we know as SMEs, the higher our risk profile. SMEs will have to decide which of the controller functions to delegate to our CROs. We've been told that the CTIS will be launched as a so-called minimal viable product with several workarounds that will increase workload, costs, and the risk of human errors. So whenever changes are made to the CTIS, it will likely have a spillover effect on our processes. So we need to decide really when is the best time for us to go live. This should consider our plans for initiating new trials during the transition period next year. But it could also be that we will have really good reasons for not going live until we have to in 2023. Next slide, please. Something about training and practicing in the system readiness. Because to prepare, we need to make our way into what for most of us, is the CTIS black box, using EMA's various training materials. For our preparation, and this was said also by the previous speaker, Andrea said we need to get access to a testing environment to understand the system. And it's really a hurdle for us that this is not available because our preparation becomes rather theoretical until we can actually start working and practicing in the system. An essential part of our preparation is using the system. And when we get that access, which we hope will not take too long, some sort of ad hoc CTIS support, could be a chat function, whatever, we just need somebody at the other end of the line, would be an essential time and resource saver for us. Next slide, please. So a few take-home messages from us at UCOPE. All in all, our preparation for CTIS is about getting a thorough understanding of what we need to do, being dependent on, and having to co-develop CTIS-related processes together with our CROs. The information released today is complex, and our task is to internalize the technical aspects of the system and translate those into some manageable business processes. Comprehensive training materials are available. Ima, thank you very much for that. We need to start preparing, and that's now. Practicing in the system was said before, it is key to our preparation, so we need access to a sandbox environment as soon as possible. And then the managing of roles and responsibilities in collaboration with our CROs, that will be complex. So we're talking about co-preparation, that we have to co-prepare with our CROs. So if you haven't already, a last one for us is that we actually propose that because we will need to work closely with our CROs, a training module with CROs together with SMEs, perhaps also with academia, would maybe make sense. So if you haven't already started preparing and planning for CTIS implementation, even if you decide that you want to be a fast follower, it's time to do so. With that, thank you very much. And I will pass the screen on to the next presenter.
Thank you very much, Trina, and really very good. And again, emphasizing the need to start preparing now, even if you want to take a little time in the transition period to engage with the system. It's important to get ready immediately and prepare and choose from the options that are available in CTIS, those that best fit your organization, and then that will enable you with the sponsor personas and organization models to simplify the system in the way that it's used by your own people in all your organizations. So I'm very happy now to introduce Rosemary Swallow. Rosemary, if you'd like to join. And Rosemary is Senior Manager in EU Regulatory Policy and Intelligence at Bayer, which she joined in July 2013. And she's broad experience across the regulatory landscape in prescription and non-prescription healthcare sectors. But she's particularly now a representative on the FPA Clinical Research Expert Group and has been working closely also with us in preparing for CTIS. So, Rosemary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Fergus, and thanks for that kind introduction. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Can indeed.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to thank Ima for giving me this opportunity to speak at this event. Next slide, please. As Fergus said, my name's Rosemary Swallow, I work within policy at Bayer, and Bayer is a member of the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, or FPA for short, and we represent large R&D-based pharmaceutical companies. Although all sponsors will face common challenges when moving from the current framework to the regulation, today I'm speaking on behalf of FPA and focusing on the large sponsor perspective and how we might prepare for CTIS Go Live. And having heard the previous two speakers, there'll be a lot of alignment there in what I have to say. Next slide, please. So the key challenge, I think, for all sponsors of all sizes is going to be good change management. Firstly, to adapt our internal processes and systems that have been used by thousands of R&D personnel for decades now to what will become the new normal in a very short time frame. And secondly, to manage the complexity that a harmonized and synchronized submission and approval system utilizing new IT tools will bring when we plan and run large-scale clinical trials, some with complex designs, or when we plan to transition our long-running trials from the directive to the regulation. Next slide, please. Large sponsors generally have clinical research functions that oversee the development program at global and regional level with personnel situated in country and used to working independently using the same core data to prepare and submit local clinical trial applications and ethics committee submissions and to maintain them in their country. This way of working and flow of information will be somewhat reversed so that national documentation can flow to the coordinating function responsible for preparing and submitting the single EU-wide submission. So we are preparing new processes and documenting them in our SOPs so that we can continue to meet global GCP requirements. We're aligning all affected country personnel and functions to enable them to use the same internal system to prepare and store documentation in our quality management systems. And we are trying to identify who will have access to and make submissions in CTIS on behalf of the whole of the EU. Next slide, please. The regulation and the CTIS in particular do bring us new challenges, and therefore we're having to make decisions about who our sponsor administrator will be from the hundreds of colleagues who currently have access to UDRAT. Who will be permitted to have access to CTIS and what user role will they be given? How will we manage those permissions with staff turnover as people leave and join? And externally, if we utilise CROs, how do we manage their permissions? Indeed, the way we work with CROs may change and will certainly be more complex in the future. Who will be responsible for and manage the interface between CTIS and other EMA systems that have already been mentioned, such as OMS and XEVMPD? Do our existing functions take on these additional responsibilities, or do we separate out the work needed for CTAs? For example, who will be the contact with our sites if we need them to register OMS if they haven't done so already? And what options will there be going forward to sort out difficulties that may arise? We are used to asking our in-country colleagues to pick up the phone and contact the health authority or ethics committee chair to discuss any issues they may have in their local languages. Can we still do this, or will we have to communicate via the system and the reporting member state only? And if we can contact them locally, will we know who to contact in the competent authority or the ethics committee if the application is made centrally? Next slide, please. We deal with multiple submissions in multiple countries at the moment, but rarely, if ever, would we encounter a situation where we might expect to receive requests for further information from multiple countries affecting both the health authority and ethics committee submission for the same clinical trial in parallel with exactly the same response period. So having one 12-day response period to handle all questions from all countries will be challenging. In my experience, companies have oversight processes to ensure that documents such as protocols stay aligned with global development programs, and those processes are usually slow and require endorsement at senior management levels. So sponsors are going to have to speed up and streamline those processes and remember to leave enough time for documents that depend on the protocol to be amended too. Updating a protocol and associated patient information and consent forms in multiple languages within the same 12-day period is going to be tough to meet. And then what about transparency? The CTR introduces an unprecedented level of transparency of clinical trial documentation. So how can we ensure we protect all protected personal data, or PPD, in our submissions? And how do we manage deferral options to protect our commercially confidential information? And finally, we will need to coordinate the collection and submission of notifications to CTIS, some of which have not been needed before. Next slide, please. Lifecycle management will be more complex once CTR is operationalised. We are used to submitting substantial modifications on a country-by-country level as they're needed. The fact that the regulation did not foresee the submission of parallel substantial modifications will require much closer coordination of changes if we're to get approvals through on time. Complex clinical trials will hold their own challenges in relation to how they are submitted, managed and published in CTIS. And then for those trials that have been running for many years and need to transition to the new regulation, we will have the task of ensuring that we identify the trials that need to transition early and ensure we know what the documentation requirements will be for transitioning. We will need to consolidate our protocols to enable transitioning to occur. And we need to find the right opportunity during the trial conduct to complete the transition process without jeopardizing the study itself or the integrity of the data being collected. And finally, we must not forget our VHP trials. We need to plan for the end of VHP and early transitioning of those trials if we want to continue to retain the benefits of harmonised assessment after go live. Next slide, please. So in summary, CTIS is an IT tool to enable the coordination and oversight of clinical research in the EEA. It has been designed to implement the regulation as written by our EU legislators. Some of our challenges come from the simple process of adapting to a new IT tool and the new ways of working that CTIS will introduce. Not having access to CTIS in a sandbox system and having a system that is evolving as we speak does make that process more difficult. But the training programs and sponsor handbook EMA are developing will help us with that. That said, many of our challenges come from the regulation itself and the synchronized CT submission processes the sponsors have wanted for some time. So all we can do is prepare for what we know is coming and remain as flexible as we can to be able to amend to those processes as CTIS develops and everyone in the EU gets familiar with and accumulates experience of working with it. Thank you very much. I'll pass back to Fergus now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, and I think that's wrapped up very nicely the perspectives of academia, small and medium and large industry in sponsoring clinical trials. So I'm very happy now to hand over to Fia Westerholm of EMA. Fia Westerholm is the Program Assurance Manager for CTIS, where in particular she has responsibilities for change management and training of all our users and user communities and communication with them. She's education in veterinary medicines, toxicology and social science, and 20 years experience in research and development, both from regulatory and industry perspective, and very much familiar with the European regulatory landscape. So I'm very pleased to be able to hand over to Fia. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Fergus, and a very good afternoon to everybody. I hope you can hear me well here. I have the pleasure on behalf of the training team and the change management team to present some of the activities that are ongoing for the benefit of yourselves, hopefully, and that you can make use of when you're preparing for CTIS and certainly for the clinical trials regulation. So we can go to the next slide, please. This is an oversight of, or an overview, I should say, of what we are doing at the moment. So the engagement that we are doing towards the sponsor side is really the organization of these communication events, the info events. We have one now, we will have some others coming. We also, as a general principle, have a collaborative approach. So we try to include the sponsors, the end user community as much as we can in defining and designing and contributing to what we are doing, so that whatever the outputs are that we are producing are really fit for purpose and fit for the community as well. Therefore, the training that we have set up and the training program, one of the fundamental principles of that is considering the huge volume of users that we will be having. We have opted in the strategy for an online program, and that is what you can see already today on the website, and we will show you a little bit about that. So we have an extensive program that is already available for anyone to use. There are the theoretical approaches, there is the audiovisual approaches, there are shorter guides, there are frequently asked questions. So all of those are there covering certain functionalities of CTIS. We also have created on top of that, to complement, a sponsor master trainer program, which is ongoing. And I can later say a couple of words of that if necessary. For online support, there is one line there saying the EMA CTIS sponsor handbook, and that is something, it's a sponsor handbook that I will talk about later, but it's something to really pay attention to and take note of, because that we think will be very useful. And there will be other supportive materials and references. We will also do a specific reach out to academia and to SME. So thank you very much for the contributions during these talks and highlighting the issues related in particular to these communities. So we have taken those into account, and we will reach out and try to support best we can. As you can see, we have some activities. And in addition, then we will also, in the beginning of next year, we will also, of course, establish a service desk for CTIS. So once it goes live, the service desk also goes live. And before that, there will be a smaller service desk that will support for the training activities. So we can move on to the next slide. And here is an overview of what I mentioned before. A couple of member states' activities have been embedded on this slide as well. So you can see where we are in the process. You can see what happened in the beginning of the year, and you can see how dense it's becoming. And there are some additional streams we could also add to the slides. As the slides will be available on the EMA website, then we can ask you to go into those later after this event and have a look at the details. So we can move on. Thank you. So for the training strategy, I already mentioned the online presence and how fundamental that has been for the whole strategy. We also have other principles of the training strategy that then explains further why we are doing things in a certain sequence. So we do training in waves, and at the moment we are focusing on the main user communities, and that's of course the member states and the sponsors. Who will need to use CTIS in the secure workspaces. There are other audiences as well, so EMA staff. Some will need to be trained for service desk. The Commission also has a stake in CTIS, in the operation of CTIS. And of course, members of the public will be very interested in the public search of clinical trials once the databases are populated. Now, we also then have a train the trainers approach, and we mentioned the sponsor master trainers. So the purpose of that is that for the wider and larger organizations, we have offered a master trainer program with the idea that these colleagues then go back to their organizations and they further disseminate the information and the knowledge about CTIS within those organizations. The online program is indeed for everybody and available. If it's on the website of the agency, it's 24/7 available for anyone. And then we will also do some complementing end user training that will not replace the online training program and online training modules, but will be complementing and further helping. So we will still plan some of those, but that is a little bit further into future. So we can move on. Here on this slide, you had the links to the websites as well. Here is the training catalog that we have defined, and all the green here means that these are modules that are available. Some few modules will still need to be made. Those are the white ones. You can see reporting. For member states, you can see Commission modules, and you can also see the public users module. And an important one for sponsors, the transition of trials from UDRA-CT to CTIS is something that we will do as soon as the functionality is ready in CTIS. We will hit on to create that module and then publish that as soon as ever we can. And the purple ones are in the making. So you can see that we are currently working on a module that is called CTIS for SME and Academia, which is particularly tailored for this user community. I will move on, please. Thank you. And I already mentioned what's on this slide, which is the variety of material types that we are creating. Not all types for all modules, but we do a good selection. There will always be a frequently asked question for each one of the modules. And then we do a bit of selection of whether we want a quick guide, an e-learning, or a video clips, or something else. But there is always a selection that suits different kind of learner types. And next, please. Thank you. So we also have created a guide, a document, a guide to CTIS training material catalog. And that contains this picture, which is perhaps not the best one on a slide like this, but it will actually walk you through the different steps of submitting and managing a trial in or trial application in CTIS, and then the related training module. So it will help you to identify the training module that goes together with a certain functionality. So that guide I would really advise you to take as a first one if you haven't had a look yet at the training materials. And for the next, please. Thank you. So we have a question in Slido, which I would ask you to have a look at and populate. So we are asking whether you already have studied CTIS by use of the online training materials that are available on the website of EMA. And Barbara is showing us the results so far, so not too many responses. I think it says 67 there, but if you haven't used those, that is really your starting point. And what we would say, and what you will hear other colleagues saying, is that to get access and to get into the system itself, the system has so many functionalities and so many options that you would do yourself a favor of actually making yourself very familiar with the training materials that are already on the website. They are there to help you to understand the system, so that then when you get into the system itself, you will understand it better. Thank you. So I think we can go back to the presentation, thanks. And then a couple of words of the sponsor handbook. So on the Thank you very much. So on this slide here, we are talking about the training environment. There were quite a few questions about the training environment in Slido, we could see. And here again, we take a waved approach. So member states, as you know, will actually must use CTIS as of the day of go live. So we are giving access to member states first to the training environment, them to get familiar with the system. So we're focusing on the master trainers. Then in a second wave, we are focusing on the sponsor master trainers and their related users. And then we will still plan for other CTIS users. And that's been very much the question that's been in Slido as well. So we are certainly looking at the concept, and we will inform you, most likely through the newsletter. You will get information about how and when you would be able to get access and under which conditions to the training environment. So I will move on. And a few final words here about sponsor handbook. It is to facilitate the sponsor preparations. It's a collection of guidance and links to reference material on key topics that's been prioritized actually by sponsor representatives. And it will also then be there to help sponsors to prepare for CTIS. It will be a living document, so we will be publishing updates on a fairly frequent basis. The first version should be actually available not any moment, but any day now. It's already in the publication process, so you should be expecting that on the agency's website very soon. And if you have comments and proposals, we have included a link to a channel within the sponsor handbook itself. So if you have proposals for topics or you have other comments on the handbook, you can place those through that link then. So that would be the way for giving us feedback on the handbook. And we can move on, and I still have 2 slides to go through. Here is an outline of the content. So you can see we already have quite a variety of items, and I know some of these items have been addressed in the Slido today with very specific questions even. So we would suggest then you have a look at the sponsor handbook and all the references that we have included there, and then see if you identify new questions. We can go to the next slide. There's always a way of placing those two. So first of all, take the sponsor handbook, have a look at that, at the linked materials. It's a lot of study for a new regular piece of regulation and a new system like this. Then we will have frequently asked questions on CTIS functionalities in the published training modules. We are looking at consolidating all of those into one document. Right now they are in the different modules. They are very extensive. Please go and help yourselves through those. Then once you've done that work and perhaps also had a discussion with your colleagues and within organizations and between organizations, if then there would be additional questions, new questions on CTIS functionalities, then this slide provides you a link as to how you can place those questions to us. And of course, the very extensive document already concerning clinical trial regulation and the interpretations of that from the European Commission is available in UTILX Volume 10, and we provide links to all of these in the sponsor handbook. And then, of course, please do follow the EMA events page as well, so that you can then attend events like this. And I think that was my last slide. So I will then hand over back to Fergus. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Fia, and really very welcome to see the sponsor handbook coming out, and we'll be watching that very closely and working with you to make sure we can further improve and add those things which really help you as sponsors to implement the regulation and work with CTIS in particular. So in fact, now it's a great pleasure to hand back to Fia, who will chair our panel session. We have a great panel, which includes our speakers from today, but also Fatima Simiris from the Portuguese agency Inframed, who has been working very closely with us as a lead sponsor PO and also in the master training, and Deborah Martins Braga from European Medicines Agency, who works with our OMS and IAM systems. So I'm really happy to welcome them all, and I'll hand back to you, Fia, with all those questions from the Slido.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fergus, and thank you to speakers and new panelists contributing to this. So without further delay, then let's explain what will happen. So we have received questions in advance of this event, and we have received the many questions. Thank you for your activity in Slido. So we will do a mix of these. There are questions from before that we will address, and some of those have been reiterated in the Slido as well. So there will be a little bit of a mix. And I think we will go a little bit in the order of the agenda. And I would now ask the panelists then that I will be addressing questions to, if you wish to pass on the questions or ask another panelist to complement, please, of course, then do so. So then, first of all, it relates to CTI's functionalities, and I'll start with a question concerning transparency. I think, and there is a very popular question in Slido about transparency, especially about part 2 of CTA application, the clinical trial application. What documents from that will be made public? I know there is also a response and guidance in Slido for many of these questions, but if I could pass this on to Fatima, and you can say a few words about this, documents from part 2, what will be made public. Perhaps you can address also a little bit the general principle of publication of documents, please.
Yeah. So good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure to be here. It was very good to listen all the presentations. While trying to go directly to the question, for part 2 documents, the documents that are available to be uploaded in CTIS, they are described in Annex 1, and the only document that will not be publicly available, it's the financial arrangement. But what you have in terms of functionality in CTIS is that you can upload a document for publication and a document which will not be for publication and which will remain on the security workspace of the member states. And this means that with this feature, you can protect information that you don't want for like personal information or other that you don't want to be publicity available on the public domain. This is for part 2. For part 1, of course, all information that it's related with the IMPD, with quality information, will not be made available. So IMPDs are not made available, or even RFIs or answers that are related with the quality issues.
Thank you.
address.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you very much, and we'll spin on and continue on the question of transparency. There were many questions about redaction, and though we haven't addressed transparency as such today, it's a very important topic. There is a particular module, I think it's module 12 of the training material. Please go and have a look because you will have a lot of answers there. But in general terms, Anna, can I pass the question to you in very general terms on transparency and redaction? How will it be done? Who will do it? Will somebody assess those documents? And how will this be handled in CTIS? So in general terms on redacted documents. Anna, are you in a position to respond?
Yes, Fia, I will try to reply to these questions. First of all, I would like to say that in CTIS, we introduced this concept of the federal, which is well defined in the document linked to the functional specification of the system that contains all the transparency rules. So my advice is that for you to be familiarized with those rules, to look at that document. So that means that in principle, this concept was introduced also to reduce the burden of redaction to the sponsors, so they can upload the document without redaction if they want to, if they wish to do so, and then they can apply a deferral. And the deferral is a period of time that we understand that by that time there will be no problems to make this information publicly available. But even though if still you want to redact your documents, you can do so. Obviously, there is no requirement in the legislation for anyone to assess that. It's the responsibility of the sponsor to perform that redaction and to remove the personal data. Which in fact, according to the regulation, should not be even in the system, but in case for whatever reason is in some documents, you should ensure that the information is redacted, but there will not be there is no legal requirement, for example, for member state to assess that, but bear in mind that this documentation will be in the public domain and will be scrutinized by the public, and therefore this may raise questions or issues. So I think that is what I would like to say. My advice is that you look at the transparency rules that are defined in the transparency document, where you have all the details.
Thank you, Anna. And to top on that, the transparency rules are linked in the handbook that will be published, and there is a specific section on data transparency. So I think on the basis of the questions in Slido, it looks like quite a lot of those will be responded if you take that document and you take those references. Now, moving to a somewhat different item. So this is about transition. And there were many, many different questions about transition. So I will hand over to Maria, I think, for answering certain questions. So there was a specific question: will all studies running in the US of end January 2022 need to report, or only start reporting once moved to the database or to CTIS? What will happen with trials under the voluntary harmonization procedure so far? And then there was also a question about specific protocols. So Maria, I think to try to cluster all these questions about transition, if you could give maybe a general answer spinning on what was presented earlier today, and explain again a little bit the transition and how it relates to CTIS, and then some details of these questions, please.
Yes, I will try. There was many questions around that. I saw that as well in the Slido. And you could say, to pick up shortly, you could say until the end of January 2022, it is possible to do a submission of an initial application to each member state. So you do not need to use the CTIS system until the end of January 2022. So until then, When it comes to the VHP, perhaps Fatima can also contribute on this, because I do not recollect the exact date, but the submission to VHP will end, I believe it's an exact date in October, right? Can you please help me here, Fatima?
Well, if you allow me, and Fia, I would like to, I think we need to have in our mind that the transition period is something that we need to look and understand in a very clear way. First of all, we need to look at the trial and understand the framework of the trial, if it's under the directive or out. If it's out of the directive, we will not be eligible for make the transition. And if for some reason the sponsor consider that the trial cannot end and should continue, this should be resubmit under the regulation. Now, looking into the directive, we have mononational trials and multinational trials. For the mononational trials, I think it's quite easy. You need to submit the package to CTIS with the information that was approved by your national competent authority, and following the rules of the CTFG that will guide you to submit a declaration where you confirm that those documents were the ones that were approved and assessed on the date. Then we move to the multinational trials. And in the multinational trials, you have, I can focus on two pieces, the VHP trials and the other ones that are not within the assessment of the VHP. The VHP will end 60 days before the launching of the system, which means that every procedure, substantial modification should be prepared and done before this. And why am I reinforcing this? For submitting the application and moving it and transition this trial to the regulation, we need to have a protocol which is harmonized and consolidated. When I say harmonized, it means that it's the same between all countries. And when I say consolidated, it means that it's a protocol that brings together all the member state specificities that are maybe are different, but you only will be able to submit one protocol. So this is only an administrative step, the consolidation of the information. But harmonization is crucial and fundamental. So you need to have a protocol harmonized to submit. Sorry, Fia, but I need to explain this then the other trials for which we don't have the VHP, you need to guarantee the same. You need to guarantee that you have an harmonized protocol between all member states. And if you don't have, there you need to submit a substantial modification under the directive framework to have this harmonized protocol and consolidate it again. So you need to bring all the different specificities of member states, and then you have the package. And my advice regarding the transition period is that the package should be done in a very careful way. Why? Because member states may react and issue corrective measures when they see that the packages and the dossier are not the ones that were approved. So please choose the right moment, as Rose Maria was saying, the right moment, because as soon as these trials will be submitted, they will be approved, they will be checked, of course, and they will be checked in terms of administrative check, and they will have a tacit approval. So you need to, for 60 days. So you need to select the right moment. That's, I think, sorry to jump in, but just I think that there is few knowledge of the transition period, and people think that it's very difficult. If we state this as a decision tree, it's quite easier, and understand how should we prepare our trial and what should we do. Thanks. Sorry, Fia, for all the time.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Fia, if I may also add a little bit on it, because I think one of the questions you also raised goes on the reporting. And I think with this very clear explanation from Fatima, I think it should also be emphasized that the reporting in CTIS should only be done on the trials that have actually transitioned into the clinical trial regulation. So just to add to that as well.
Thank you very much for that specification, Maria. And we will move on to user access management and organization registration and investigator site registration. But just before we do that, if I can pass on to Rosemary concerning this issue with transitions. For the sponsor handbook, we had a very good contribution, and there is a very good clear section on transition and points to consider. Rosemary, do you want to say a couple of words about transition from a sponsor perspective?
Yeah, I think the handbook does sort of give points to consider and will be very useful. And I think if you look at the Q&A, that does help and talk about the process for transition and how to do that for mononational trials and multi-country trials. I think the problem that sponsors will have is defining what constitutes a harmonised protocol, because we do have situations where there are small differences between countries in what they do, and is that harmonised enough if it's all in one document? So I think that process will be more difficult for the larger trials, but that information is there, and we hope that if there are any changes, that will be sort of communicated in time. And I suppose the only other thing to say is that I understand that the process within the CTIS will be one of an initial application. So tacit approval should come through in 60 days, but it is possible for a member state to make a request for further information, and so sponsors should consider that and leave themselves sufficient time to do the process and not run out and try to do all the transitions in December 2024 when it will be too late.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, for that clarification. I think I can see, Fatima, you put your video on, but I think we need to move on to user management. So these questions will go to Anna.
Just would like to say that reassessment would be completely avoided. Okay, so that's the point. But just to clarify that we are not going to reassess what was assessed before.
Thank you. So no reassessment. Thank you for that confirmation. User access management and organization management. Anna, these questions will go to you. So there is not entirely, it's not entirely clear, I think, to the audience how exactly the sponsor administrator and the user access management, how they couple together. So one of the questions is, for instance, that concerning user management, will sponsors be required to manage requests for CTIS user access separately within their organization? And this is a little bit symptomatic of probably a wider question. So Anna, could you summarize briefly how the user management actually works in practice and what the relationship is between the sponsor administrator and the user and the registrations? Thank you. And then we will have a question on organizations as well, and specifically investigator sites. Let's take that after. Anna.
No, just to clarify, for a user to perform, let's say, business activities in the system, they will need to be assigned a role, and are the administrators the roles that can assign roles to users. But in the sponsor workspace, there is also an alternative in the sense that the user, when they get the credential, they can log in the system, and then from their profile, there is a section that says roles. So in that section, it will be listed if any roles have been assigned to that user, or otherwise they will have also the option to request a role to the administrator. So they can click in the request for the role, they can select the organization for which they are requesting that particular role, what is the role they want to be assigned, and that the request will be seen by default by the sponsor administrator from the user management tab that are in CTIS. In fact, when the sponsor admin goes to the user management tab, by default, we'll see all the requests from user, and then will proceed and approve or reject those requests as applicable. So therefore, in the sponsor workspace, there are two ways to get a role. You can let's say, get a role by invitation, meaning that the administrator will assign the role directly to the user via the user management functionality, but also exists the alternative for the user to request the role to the administrator. So the administrator will see those roles and will decide if those roles should be approved or rejected. So we have a bidirectional way to, let's say, to ensure a user get a role. It's up to its sponsor organization if they want to use both directions, or they want to only ensure a user get role by invitation, or vice versa. So it's, I think CTIS is flexible in that sense, and then it's more for you to decide how you want to use the system.
Thank you, Anna. We have a couple of minutes left where we can allocate a couple of questions, and we have, of course, much more than we can allocate and respond to today. But as Sarah was indicating in the chat as well, we will take those questions back and we will make sure they make their way into various documents. We won't publish the Q&As of this meeting as such. Anna, concerning investigator sites, many questions have been raised. Who will be responsible for the registration of the sites, and how will they be registered? And will it then, a tag-on question is it a sponsor? Is it the CRO that will register themselves? That's another question for those organizations. But investigator sites first.
Yeah.
How
Okay.
are they addressed?
Yeah, I will clarify perhaps for the first part, and probably for the second, I may hand over to Deborah, who has joined the panel as well. No, I have to say that for the submission of an application, it's not, let's say, mandatory to have the investigator site registered in OMS. You may want to do it in advance to the submission of the clinical trial application and go to OMS, as I explained in the presentation, and register that investigational site. But if that is not the case, when you are preparing your application, how it works in the system is that you will apply to search in OMS to see if the site is already registered there. If it's not there, then you can register the organization of that investigational site and create it directly in CTIS. And on top, you will be asked to include some additional information that obviously is not handled in OMS, is handled only in CTIS, like the name of the investigator, the department, and so there are specific information that is handled only in CTIS. So you will be able to proceed even if the investigational site is not registered in OMS. And regarding who can do that registration, my understanding is that there is no limitation in terms of who can do that registration. Whenever the information that is requested is provided, and perhaps I will hand over to Deborah because she is managing OMS and she's in a better position probably to answer this question. Deborah, please.
Yeah, so thank you, Anna. So very quickly going to the basic requirements for creating some data in OMS. So you can do either via the CTIS portal or directly in the OMS portal. Who can actually create such data in the OMS dictionary? The goal, the objective of OMS is to have anyone that has the proper access to be able to create and update any other of the content. How can we prevent any malicious requests to come into our system? For this, we have an internal and very robust validation process. To all of the requests that we receive, we require supporting documentation that we will later on validate veracity of such a document against all sorts of reliable source of information. We're talking trade registry, national business registry. We're talking DUNS website, depending on the jurisdiction of the organization that you're trying to create with OMS. I hope this clear. Of course, we can talk about OMS for for a day, but I think this in a nutshell.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you very much, Deborah. And there is actually a longer, much longer training and material available on OMS already on the website of the agency. And you will also find links to these from the sponsor handbook once that's been published in 1 or 2 days. Fergus, the question and answer session right now, we have no more time for that. Would have been interesting to hear from Andrea and Trine, perhaps the most famous question that they, or most popular question that they ever get from an academic perspective and an SME perspective, and how they normally respond to that. But unfortunately, I think we are out of time. So Fergus, I leave it to you then to close the meeting. And thank you so much, panelists and speakers, for contributing to answering these questions. It is very clear that we need more of these sessions. Thank you very much, and hand over to Fergus.
No, thank you very much, Fia, and to all our speakers and panelists. It's really been an excellent and very informative afternoon. I'm delighted to be able to say that we have 1,800 people online following, and for those who want to revisit some of the information, and indeed to enable them to share that, or for others who haven't been able to follow today, the presentations and a video recording of the event will be made available on our EMA event page. And we'd also like to ask you to fill out the feedback survey, which is on the EMA event page. That's really helpful in organizing us to improve various aspects of our training and keep on being able to work and support with you the implementation of the clinical trial regulation and CTIS, which is such an exciting opportunity now. It brings challenges, but I think there are challenges we can embrace in order to improve the clinical trial framework and infrastructure in Europe, and especially facilitate multi-national clinical trials, but even at mononational level to be able to move that forward in a very streamlined way. So please prepare, look at all the options that are available to you to organize your people and your processes to best fit with the clinical trial regulation and CTIS, so that you can make best advantage of that for the kinds of research that you do. It's coming on Saturday now, the announcement in the official journal, and then on the 31st of January, the clinical trial regulation, and therefore CTIS, will come into application. Use the transition year wisely, build up your knowledge, follow the trainings, look at your organization and how better to develop, whether you want to move to a different model of organizing with specialized groups, or how you will manage between yourselves and other partners or CROs that you're working with, and for academia to really look to how best you can use the clinical trial regulation and CTIS to help you expand your research nationally and across Europe. So thank you all very, very much. Really stick with it, stay with us. We will have more future events. We will be delivering, as Fia said, the sponsor handbook, and that also we will welcome feedback on, so that we can ensure that future versions add in the information which is most important to enable you to fulfill your needs and really make the best from CTIS and the clinical trial regulation. So good afternoon. Thanks to all our speakers and panelists, and to all 1,800 of you who followed us online. Thank you very, very much. Good afternoon.